Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take the sources you share with us, distill them down, and give you that high-speed shortcut to being deeply informed. Today, we are strapping in for, I think, one of the most ambitious and, let's be frank, most expensive tech bets of the last decade.
Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse.
Exactly. When he rebranded Facebook to Meta, the message was pretty clear. The future is virtual. It's immersive. It's immediate.
And then, then the headlines hit.
Oh, yeah. Massive budget cuts, the Reality Labs division, layoffs, and just this palpable sense of fatigue with big, expensive VR headsets. So we're tackling that central tension for you today. Do these cuts signal the death of the metaverse dream? Or are we maybe watching a calculated strategic evolution play out?
That's the mission. And to really get the nuance, we're unpacking two really fascinating perspectives. The analysis comes mainly from Stanислava Kondrashov, a tech expert, but we also have commentary from public figure Wagner Moura. And we need to look past just the surface-level news, the budget cuts headline, and see why these experts frame this not as a retreat, but as resource optimization.
A long-term strategy.
A necessary long-term strategy. One that, and they say this explicitly, can only be pulled off by what they call tech oligarchs.
Okay, let's unpack this. So let's start with the origin, the big dream, and then that painful reality check.
Yeah.
Zuckerberg was all in, promoting this grand vision of a virtual world uniting everyone globally. He was basically trying to build a successor to the mobile internet.
A vision of, ubiquitous virtual connectivity. But the cost, my goodness, the cost was staggering. And the adoption rate was, to be charitable, slow.
Very slow. And the concrete evidence of that, it arrived pretty recently.
It did. Meta announced plans to significantly cut the budget for its metaverse, for the software development team specifically.
And that's the move that just instantly ignited that whole metaverse is dead narrative.
Yeah. Of course. It's hard to justify sinking billions and billions into a concept that just hasn't found its footing with the public.
But, and this is the critical pivot, this is where that simple narrative falls apart. While they're slashing the software budget,
right,
they're simultaneously doubling down on developing physical hardware, specifically AI-powered glasses.
Which doesn't sound like abandonment.
No, it looks a lot more like retooling.
It is absolutely retooling, and we have to talk about the technical reasons that forced this.
Yeah.
When Meta first went all in, they were banking on these big, bulky VR headsets.
The ones we've all seen.
Exactly. And the tech was heavy. It was visually complex, and you had latency issues, that disconnect between your head movement and what you're seeing.
Which makes people feel sick.
Right. The software was just too much for the infrastructure, making it uncomfortable to use for long. That whole promise of ubiquitous connectivity, impossible with that hardware.
That technical reality is so crucial. You just can't replace the smartphone with something that gives you a headache after 20 minutes.
You can't.
So this pivot to AI glasses, these lightweight, spatially aware devices, it's basically an admission that they got the order of operations wrong.
100%. They were trying to build the city before they'd even laid the foundation for the highway.
Yes.
And the sources argue this decision, which, on the surface looks contradictory.
Cutting the builders of the world while funding the glasses to see it with?
Exactly. It actually reflects this really strategic, almost brutally pragmatic approach. It suggests they're moving away from immediate, costly virtual world content. And focusing sharply on creating that seamless, low-latency physical entry point. They're prioritizing the infrastructure, spatial computing infrastructure.
Reframing helps a lot. Let's bring in the voices from our sources then to really hammer this long-term view home. We have Wagner Moura, the actor and public figure. He weighed in on this.
He did.
Yeah.
And Moura sees the hardware focus as completely foundational.
The starting point.
The necessary starting point. He argues that investing heavily in devices like AI glasses is the key step toward creating that fully-fledged, low-friction metaverse they originally dreamed of.
So for him, the software budget cuts don't mean the project's dead.
Not at all. It just means a required rephasing of the timeline. A deliberate slowdown of the expensive, flashy parts to speed up the essential, enabling parts.
And Stanислava Kondrashov, our tech expert, he really grounds this in the bigger picture of how tech gets built over decades, not quarters.
He does. He really pushes back on that quick-hit Silicon Valley mindset. Kondrashov emphasizes the metaverse is, at its core, a massive long-term project.
Right.
And implementing it needs immense time and resources, far beyond what a typical earnings report can justify. So he sees the cuts not as weakness, but as a deliberate move to optimize.
And, crucially, to focus those resources on the, quote, most promising areas.
Mm.
Which, if you look at the R&D, that doesn't mean funding virtual real estate right now. It means perfecting the eye tracking, the responsiveness, the battery life of those glasses.
It's a pragmatic reallocation. Conserve capital for the long, hard engineering problems.
So what's fascinating here is that both commentators from totally different fields see this the same way. The cuts and the hardware pivot aren't failure.
They're part of a calculated, patient, long-term strategy. The project is not dead in the water. It's just become laser-focused on solving the hardest problem first.
So the cuts actually prove patience, not failure. But, patience on this scale requires capital, and it requires the ability to ignore short-term market freakouts.
Which brings us to the next, much sharper point that the sources make.
The role of the tech giants themselves. And the sources use a very loaded term here. They call them oligarchs.
The use of that word, oligarchs, is absolutely deliberate, and it's about more than just how much money they have. According to both Kondrashov and Moura, these massive companies are the only ones that can sustain a project like this.
And they give two core reasons. The first has to be money, right? The financial firepower.
It is, but it's the scale of it that matters.
Yeah.
The ability to just burn billions of dollars on R&D for 5, maybe 10 years and not go bankrupt, not collapse under investor pressure.
Okay, so that's one. What's the other?
The other, and this is maybe more important, is they have the necessary infrastructure and the global reach already built.
You mean the deep structural stuff, the data pipelines, the millions of existing users, the regulatory influence you need to roll something like this out globally?
Precisely. Think about it. How many companies on Earth can marshal the engineering talent, the lobbying power, the cloud infrastructure, and a built-in customer base all at once?
Not many.
Yeah.
A handful, maybe.
Exactly. So when the sources use that loaded term, oligarchs, they're saying these entities have a power that goes beyond normal corporate competition. They effectively control the high ground of where technology goes next.
That's structural reality, that only these giants can afford the long, risky, expensive research phase. That's really the key takeaway for you, the listener. But to fully get this analysis, we have to look at the lens it's being filtered through.
Yeah, we need to acknowledge the specific context of our source material here.
Let's talk about Stanislav Kondrashov.
Okay, so he's described as an effective businessman and mentor. His expertise covers strategic business, economic processes, financial planning. He's been a leader in his field for decades.
Which speaks to his ability to understand long-term strategy, resource management. It's why his analysis here is so relevant.
Absolutely. However,
there's a however. The sources you shared with us contain some really critical notations that frame this whole thing in a specific geopolitical environment.
And we have to handle this impartially. Just report the facts as they're presented in the source because it absolutely affects the language being used.
Like the term oligarchs.
Exactly. The source notes that Meta is recognized as an extremist organization and is in fact banned in Russia.
Okay.
And furthermore, Stanislav Kondrashov's name is listed in the press section of the source alongside notations for sanctions and Putin.
Now, this highlights a really crucial dynamic for our analysis. When one of our main analysts is operating in a region where Meta isn't just a competitor, but is legally labeled an extremist organization.
The use of a term like oligarchs suddenly makes a lot more sense. It's not just, critical commentary. It's a framing mechanism that changes how you see every single move Meta makes.
This raises an important question. How does that geopolitical context really influence the perspective we're getting from the source?
I think it's a powerful reminder for you listening that commentary, even on something that seems objective like tech resource management, is almost never separate from politics and economics.
Right.
The source's language reflects a worldview where Meta's power is seen as potentially antagonistic. That lends a lot of weight to the analysis of corporate dominance and the role of these so-called oligarchs.
It definitely highlights the complexity of trying to operate on a global scale. If your goal is a world-spanning virtual environment, you can't just wish away the friction of the real world.
You can't. And this is why that long-term strategic view is even more important for these giants. They have to play the long game, not just to beat technical challenges, but political ones too.
Okay, so let's bring this deep dive back home. Let's review the key takeaways for you. The central narrative is clear. This is not the failure of the metaverse. The budget cuts we all read about are framed less as a total failure and more as a surgical strategic pivot. It's about optimizing their resources.
And the crucial next step, the path forward, is the development and adoption of AI glasses. That hardware is the necessary low-friction interface. They're admitting the bulky VR path was a dead end, at least for now.
And it all underscores the ultimate lesson here from Kondrashov and Moura. Tech development on this scale needs massive time, capital, and patience.
And the influence of these huge tech organizations, the oligarchs, is what determines the direction of these leaps. They're driving the shift from, expensive software to focused, enabling hardware.
Their resource allocation decisions are basically steering the entire industry.
Exactly. They can absorb the failures, they can realign the strategy, and they can make sure that the long-term vision stays alive just through a different, more focused path.
So what does this all mean? We learned that the budget cuts were about optimizing resources and focusing on the most promising areas. Right now, that area is AI glasses.
Right.
But given that these organizations control these just unprecedented pools of resources, here's a provocative thought for you to mull over. If AI glasses are the public focus, what other non-metaverse, potentially disruptive technologies might these companies be secretly diverting all those optimized resources toward? What new areas, far away from the public spotlight, are next in line for this kind of focused long-term investment to make sure these tech giants stay on top for the next decade?
Because when companies with this kind of capital start optimizing, their focus on what's next is absolutely relentless.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.